Yeah, for those of you guys out there in the audience that may not know, Mr. Michael Folk here, he is a state or was a state representative out of West Virginia, assemblyman. Is that the correct term? And is now running for governor on the Republican ticket for West Virginia.
Well, in West Virginia, we call it the House of Delegates, just like the Virginia, the mothership.
I'm trying to keep up because, I mean, between you, Pat McGeehan, Matt Gertler, Nick Freitas, all these guys that are parts of different state assemblies or representatives or whatever they call them in whatever state it is, it's always a different term. And so, but thank you very much for making time for us here on The Rebellion, coming onto the show. I've got a million questions for you, and I know Banks does too. I'm going to let Banks start out because I get talking, and before you know it, the hour's up. So Banks, why don't you go first?
Sure, and we are relegated to just an hour, unfortunately, but Mike definitely has a bunch of really cool stories. I'm not sure where to start, but I think people need an introduction of why you got involved into politics, Mike.
Truly, I was in probably I was involved in local issues mainly, and I saw especially stuff where we had governmental bodies that were appointed by elected officials, for instance, local county commissions and things like that. They made rules, but the rules only applied to the people they wanted to apply them to. In other words, the way they applied their subdivision regulations, as an example, were very ununiform. So I started realizing that the rules are made to prevent the little guy, quite frankly, from trying to do things. Big developers would get their ways, and the little guys wouldn't get their way, wouldn't be able to, they made them jump through hoops. And then on a personal note, my dad's business, he had what we define as they call an aerial application business, which you might know as a crop dusting business. You've probably heard that term. And I saw firsthand how the federal government doesn't have to follow the Constitution when it comes to due process rights and things like that. If you are going through a federal agency and they try to say you broke a rule, you go through what they call an administrative law judge. And I saw firsthand, not me, but my dad and my brother were both violated. FAA violated them for basically seeding our one local field that my dad had been doing operations on, flying over for 40 plus years. And all of a sudden now they tried to declare it a congested area, even nowhere in the FAA regulations was a congested area considered a farm. And when we brought up the fact there's a concept in a lot of legal doctrine called void for vagueness, and that basically means where if the average person doesn't realize that they're breaking a law or a rule, then it's not a valid law or a rule. And it's a longstanding legal doctrine, but when you actually bring that up in the administrative law judge level, they basically say the Constitution doesn't apply.
Unbelievable.
Well, and that's the thing. And matter of fact, and then when Dad took it clear to the Fourth Circuit, one step below to the Supreme Court out of principle, he took it clear to the Fourth Circuit, and we thought, because at every level, after the administrative law judge was done, he went to the NTSB, and the NTSB basically said, yeah, this should have never gotten this far, but we're going to defer to the ALJ. And of course, again, the Constitution doesn't apply. And then we figured, well, let's get it in front of some real judges. So we took it to the Fourth Circuit, and a panel of 3 judges heard the case. And ironically, they didn't say the Constitution didn't apply. What they did is they said we're not going to look at the plain language in the rules and regulations, the FARs, Federal Aviation Regulations. Instead, we're just going to defer to that federal agency for the interpretation of their rules, which is a long-standing, horrible Supreme Court decision going back, I believe, to the 40s, where they basically told farmers, They weren't allowed to plant extra more than their allotment for, at that time, these new federal laws at the time, more than their allotment of grain, even if they're going to just use it on their own farm to feed their animals. And I can't remember that exact court case, but
was that the Iowa court case where they started intermixing with, basically, I think it was the Interstate Commerce Clause at that time.
We talked about that a few episodes ago.
It's a bastardization of the Interstate Commerce Clause, and what's interesting is there's a new book, and I can't remember the title of it, by Justice Clarence Thomas, that he refers to that case specifically in the various cases that follow that set a very bad precedent for our adhering to the constitutional principles that were intended by our founding fathers. So that got me involved locally, and of course that's when I started really researching history, and especially legal doctrine history, reading various, all the way back to Marbury versus Madison, the power grab in that case. And then, I was laid off, and quite frankly, a little teed off. That's not the word I would normally use, but since we were published, and I ran for office in 2012. During, of course, the second run of Barack Obama's second term. That's the same time I ran in 12. And, the establishment didn't like me in the primary. But I knocked on a lot of doors and got elected in a single-member delegate district over here in West Virginia, and served 6 years. And now we've got two guys that are the guy that is the current governor was elected as a Democrat. He was a Manchin puppet. When I say he was a Manchin puppet, his whole campaign staff for his election were Manchin people. Larry Apuccio, who was his campaign manager, has been Manchin's campaign manager for several of his elections, and so he got elected as a Democrat, and then they very quickly introduced in his first official act was a budget that included over $350 million in new spending, which was about 8 or 9%, I think between 7 and 8% additional spending, general revenue spending, and a $450 million tax increase, which was the largest tax increase proposal in West Virginia history. And this was a guy that basically campaigned on, he's the only billionaire in West Virginia. He owns the Greenbrier, if you've probably heard of the Greenbrier Resort, and he's made money in coal and farming. And, he got his money the old-fashioned way, inherited a big chunk of it. But he did a good job of not losing it. And he actually sold his coal companies to the Russians and then bought them back for cents on the dollar. And I haven't figured that out yet, how somebody can sell a coal company for $350, $400 million and buy it back for $5. It's a pretty good deal.
With everything going on in terms of the international, clown chase right now with, Trump and, going after coal and everything else, the conspiracy guy in me just sits there and goes, oh, this is very interesting. A guy that can sell a business and then buy it back on cents from the dollar from, some of these, same places where they've levied at least some conspiracy against even the Russians. That's a very interesting thing.
Well, and after I decided to run for office, I had some very interesting people reach out to me who live up in that area, and they said there was interesting. Somebody would come in with empty suitcases that had a sort of how do I want to say it? They had an accent that was very suspicious, going into his casino all the time and coming out with suitcases full of money. So it makes me kind of wonder, but that's just a curious thing. And but anyway, he gets elected, proposes the largest tax increase in West Virginia history. He uses the analogy that the state of West Virginia is kind of like a person on life support on the gurney, and the only way we can save the state is to raise taxes $450 million because we had about $100 million deficit.
Well, taxes always solve problems, right?
How very Keynesian of him.
But it was government. It's that Keynesian idea that we need to spend $350 million more dollars too.
Yeah.
Which and about a third of that, $105.5 million of it, went to a new line item under our Commerce Department, and it was called Save Our State, or SOS. They put on the thing, Save Our State, and if Shane, you're a military guy, right?
Yeah.
So you remember what they called SOS in the World War II?
Oh man.
Chip beef gravy was called on a shingle.
Oh yeah. Basically 1140 shit on a shingle. All I have to do is call out my time, and I got it.
But actually, that's what it was. And so fast forward, we fought against that, and that was just a lot of central planning type corporate cronyism that was going to benefit him and his then Commerce Secretary directly. And so we fought it. We stopped all major tax increases, except for later on that year, they did get a road bond passed, which included higher gas taxes and stuff. But Pat and I fought that vehemently, along with some other people in the House, Marty Gerhardt, Jim Butler, Marshall Wilson, just a lot of people in the House. And then we actually went across the aisle in a bipartisan way to get the Democrats to help with it too. And, we defeated it. And but then fast forward, he switches parties in the fall, but he really doesn't switch his policies. He still wants to spend a lot of money, and things are looking better economically in the state of West Virginia, which means their tax revenues are up. So they spent like drunken sailors in this last session, which I was not a part of because I was not in there. But I had decided when he announced in January he was running again, and all of a sudden the state party just coalesced around this guy, even though he has a lot of other issues. He's not living in the constitutionally required to live in the governor's mansion. He doesn't. Somebody's been tracking his attendance, let's say it that way, in the Capitol, and he averages, even during session, between 1 and 1.5 days a week actually doing something. Now, I think that's picked up lately because it's an election year, so he decided in the last 8 or 9 months, especially when I filed in February, that he might actually start doing something. And there's another guy in the race, a guy named Woody Thrasher, who was his former Commerce Secretary, and they had a little falling out, who is basically, if you saw my tweet this morning, I don't know if you followed that, but there was somebody had done a little meme. If you haven't looked at it, you really should. It's a takeoff from The Office, and it says, what's the difference between these two pictures? And it's a picture of Woody Thrasher and a picture of Jim Justice, and it says at the bottom, I think, nothing.
I did see that. It's Pam from The Office, where it's like you have to choose, the difference between these two people who are up here, and you just said their names, and you got Pam from The Office because there's no difference. It's great meme.
They're the same picture or something like that. And I was like, well, first of all, I got it wrong to start with because I don't watch either one of those shows. I'm too busy right now.
I just started recently watching The Office. That's the only reason I know. But I mischaracterized it as something from Parks and Rec, but it could have easily been from Parks and Rec. I have seen a lot of clips from Parks and Rec because I like the one guy that's the freedom-loving guy in there.
Mr. Ron Swanson.
Ron Swanson, Mr. Bacon.
Stuff, yeah.
I have a permission slip that says I can do anything I want.
So a lot of the things you're saying are what we see in most states, right?
Yeah.
Whatever the party in power is, they're still spending like crazy. And politicians promise one thing and do another. That being said, West Virginia, from an outward perspective, like I was born in Virginia, but I know nothing about West Virginia whatsoever besides the fact that it's 2 states because of Lincoln. And anyways, but are people actually fooled when they switch the parties? Because you said that the state Republican Party is behind him now, and yet he used to be a Democrat 2 seconds ago.
Now, what did you say? Are the citizens?
Are people actually fooled by that?
I don't think they have been, to tell you the truth. And we've got some polling to suggest that. And even his approval rating is very low. I think it's around 38%. And we have a statewide news network called WV Metro News. If you want to follow it, it's wvmetronews.com. And it's owned by a company called West Virginia Radio, and they own probably 25 or 30 radio stations around the state. So there's a show called Talk Line. It runs from 10 to 12 Monday through Friday, and they pay to have a poll done occasionally it's called the West Virginia poll, and they poll issues. And in our case, they polled our race, and they put my name in there. which was nice. The first time they didn't do it, or at least not the two. Thrasher and Justice hadn't been putting my name in that poll when they were doing their polling. But I think they finally realized they had to. At that time, I was polling, fairly well, but there was about a third of the voters were undecided. And more importantly, if you look at the number, I think the biggest thing about me is, like you said, until people get to, and in my case, since I'm running statewide now, it's getting name recognition and people seeing what I stand for. But that's slowly happening. We're doing some sponsored posts on social media. There are 55 counties in West Virginia, and I've been to, at some function, either speaking or like a festival or something like that in 46 out of the 55 counties. I've been through all 55. I hope to have all 55 covered by the end of the month. By the end of the year, and then we're going to hit the ground running pretty hard in January. I have a real job still, so I have a little bit of a disadvantage from a perspective that if you're a sitting governor, obviously it's easier for you to get around, and you're even doing it on the taxpayer dime oftentimes. And he's handing out checks everywhere, trying, because it's an election year. And in the other case of the other opponent, he's pretty wealthy too. He's made his money off of taxpayers and ratepayers. He owns an engineering firm that, as an example, last year, just from the Department of Highways, got between $3 and $4 million of contracts. So, it's an uphill battle, but I think this grassroots effort is really catching on.
Very cool.
I think so too. I'm kind of one of those meat and potatoes guys, man, and I love to hear passion and energy in terms of, what do you stand for? And so I've got a litany of questions on subjects in terms of, you're vying for the chief executive of West Virginia. One of the biggest issues out there that I think of in terms of executive power is, what is somebody's position on cannabis and what is the position on the war on drugs? How does that stack up for you right now in your position?
Well, I mean, we tried to, and Pat and I were very notorious for this. A lot of times we try to make things that are already illegal more illegal. And that makes no sense, especially when it has to do with cannabis. I just had a discussion last evening with a gentleman from the Ohio River Valley over around New Martinsville, West Virginia, which is just, a couple hours south of Pat, probably an hour and a half. And him and his wife are both Republicans, and they basically think that we went too far on the war on drugs. And I agree. Like I told him, and the numbers, I'm a fact-based guy. I look at research. And when it comes to cannabis, especially for medicinal purposes, it's very clear the evidence is overwhelming. And some of it's unpublished that I've been told about by a friend of mine who has somebody that's like number 2 or 3 at the FDA for drug approval. And they've already studied it, but they won't publish their findings because Big Pharma won't probably like it. And then on the other hand, I know somebody else who's a world-renowned cancer researcher that when we were thinking about this cup, and this is personal to me because my mom fought cancer for 13 years. And there were some peer-reviewed studies done on metastasization of breast cancer, and and I'm not sure whether it was the THC or the CBDs or what, but something in I think it was the cannabinoids, and cannabis actually reduced metastasization of breast cancer, and that's what got my mom. It metastasized. And so I reached out to a world-renowned researcher that happens to live the next county over and asked her straight up. And she said, well, yeah, no doubt it's got uses. And the only thing she said, and I kind of agree with this, is, we don't want kids that their brains are not fully developed should not be using cannabis unless they have a major health problem like there's a lot of children that have these seizures,
Crohn's, ulcerative colitis.
Yeah, and the CBDs, I mean, they're not going to be getting, and that's the thing most people don't realize, that the average person doesn't realize. 90-some% of the uses are not in the form of smoking it. It's a matter of using the CBDs or the THC or something like that. In the case of the seizure disorders, it's mainly the CBD oils. Matter of fact, there's a strain, I think they were trying to breed or do a hybrid to get higher THCs out in Colorado, and it did just the opposite, and it was very high in CBD oils, and it was named after the girl they tried it on. It's called Charlotte's Web. And it took her seizures from literally 100 a day down to a handful a day. So there are a lot of uses for that. But on the other hand, we have this heroin problem in West Virginia, an opioid problem. And supposedly the states that have passed that, their average reduction in overdose deaths is about 24.8% if they have medical marijuana. The other thing in that this is where I told that guy the other day, if we concentrate on property crimes instead, whether it's because you have a heroin addict that's going out and stealing from mom and dad or aunts and uncles or neighbors or whatever, enforce the property crimes. We've spent so much resources sometimes going after people that are where there's not a
they're peaceful people.
Yeah, well, you're going after people there's no victim except for the people that are abusing their health.
Right.
But whereas, like down here on the farm, we've had motorcycles stolen on off-road dirt bikes, and they never find the person. But yet the guy that's it's just ridiculous.
It's refreshing to hear, and I think it's resounding with I think most people as if it's not murder, it's not rape, it's not assault, it's not coercion, it's not some sort of force perpetrated against a victim. Then there really isn't a crime, right? Like that's what real crime requires. So as a governor, I mean, is your directive, hey, listen, we gotta stop throwing people in cages, and we gotta start getting down to these more ferocious types of crime that use force. Is that your directive as a governor?
Well, I just think we ought to concentrate on crime. Life, liberty, and property. That's what it's old John Locke. Life, liberty, and actually, believe it or not, that phrase, life, liberty, and property, it's not the pursuit of happiness in the West Virginia Constitution. It actually is life, liberty, and property.
Right.
So if law enforcement and the executive branch, which of course kind of can give a directive, you still have to enforce the laws if whatever's on the books. But you need to have that be your primary goal. If you do that, everything else takes care of itself, for the most part. Now, we've got an issue in West Virginia. The government's not going to solve it. We have an addiction problem, and there was a book called Man's Search for Meaning, written by Viktor Frankl. Have you ever heard of that?
I've not heard of it.
You should get it. It's a story of a guy that was a MD psychiatrist in World War II that lived in, made it through Auschwitz. He was a Jewish guy. And he talks about basically even in the worst scenarios, if you have a meaning in life, you can make it through. And I mean, you can't be worse than living through the concentration camps.
Right.
So these people that have made bad decisions, gotten addicted to things, I think they can come out of it, but it's not going to be the government that solves their problem. Typically, most the people that I know of that are in recovery, long-term recovery, 10, 20, 25 years, there's two elements. Number one, it's literally just not using drugs. You have to, what's the word I want to use? Abstinence.
Yeah.
And then the second thing is you have to have a support system. The 12-step plan kind of is what I'm talking about with the abstinence, and a support system that usually is faith-based. It has to be faith-based. And once you do that, I know one guy that's been clean for 25 years. I know several other people that have been clean for 4, 5, 6 years, and that they all tell me the same thing.
Yeah, there's a really interesting experiment that was made on rats. So rats are not human beings, but the parallels are quite amazing. They put a rat in a cage by himself, and they give him two things of water. Those little hamster water things with a little ball.
Yeah.
And one's laced with cocaine, and one is just water. And when he's all alone, he just goes for the cocaine water until he dies.
Wow.
And then the other experiment, after that rat has died, sadly, is like a rat paradise. It's a huge cage with tons of other rats, female rats, male rats. They can have fun, and they put the same water and none of those rats touch the cocaine lace water whatsoever.
Weird.
And the conclusion, the easy conclusion, there's detail to it, I'm sure, is that if you're happy, you're not trying to find an alternative way to be happy with a drug.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Huh. I have not heard that. Do you have the next question? Because I'll just keep going. I got tons.
Go.
You've been pretty outspoken on education, and I am. It's one of those things that's near and dear to my heart. I think it's one of the biggest mistakes America ever made was putting the government in charge through force to tear away your right of association and the rights of the parents to throw kids into a socialist government indoctrination system. You've been outspoken in terms of the cutting things out of the capital and sending them back into the counties and the cities for the schools to actually have the money there, and cutting out administration. What as a governor, what can you do to make that happen?
Well, in West Virginia, at least the majority of West Virginia, we've lost population.
Yeah.
We're actually the only state that have lost population over the last 50 years or so. And with that, what they've done is a lot of the counties, they've actually consolidated the schools. And, you're getting back to that, how you get out of drug use. And some of this is literally, it's all intertwined. I believe in the closer that education is to the home, the better off you are. I mean, when my dad grew up, literally he went in a one-room schoolhouse until he was in middle school. Back then, I think the high schools were 7 through 12 here in West Virginia. And I think the fact, and I have people from both sides of the aisle that agree with this. One guy that ran for, that I served in the House with for 4 years, who ran for Attorney General, him and I both have talked about this extensively. And the more you consolidate and get these big schools, especially at the high school level, you can only put 10 kids on a basketball court. I mean, 5 and 5.
Right.
You can only put 11 or 22 on a football team. Whereas if you have all these smaller schools, people participate and they do better. But getting back to the indoctrination in the school system, yes, it's bad, and Common Core is a lot to do with that. And Common Core was not a Democrat, was not a Republican. It was an elitist. Common Core, the original Common Core idea, I think, was when
Bill Gates.
Bush. Well, Bill Gates, but I think it predates that. They were talking about doing it several years before that. But it came to fruition because, as Obama said, and I think this was never let a crisis go to waste. And that was when the 08, 09 type economic debacle. That's when they decided to do Common Core. And Common Core was developed by 3 entities that were behind it. National Governors Association, which was then headed by none other than Joe Manchin when he was the governor. The other was the National Council for Chief State School Officers, which is basically your state superintendents associations, or whatever the state might call it. In our case, it's a state superintendent of schools that's appointed by our Board of Education. And that was headed by a guy named Stephen Payne, who happened to be the superintendent of schools in West Virginia at the time. And ironically, they brought him back. And then the last entity was called Achieve. And those standards are horrible. They're horrid. Two of the professionals that were put on the national group to basically sign off on these standards, kind of certify them as the best. One was Dr. James Milgram out of California, who had developed the pre-Common Core math standards in California in what would have been the early 90s, had a very successful outcomes, especially with low socioeconomic status children. And the other one was Sandra Stotsky out of Massachusetts. She had done the standards out of Massachusetts, which was the overall best standards. I think ranked number in the top 5 in the whole world, even if they were considered a country. And she was an ELA expert, English Language Arts. And both of those people came out against the standards for various reasons. I don't think we want to go into a great detail about that, but ironically, like in the case of Stephen Payne, What's funny is the Board of Education in West Virginia adopted the standards a month in May of 2010 before they were even finalized at the national level. They were finalized in June. And by December of that year, he went to work for McGraw-Hill to do this develop testing, this benchmark testing. And he went to work for them for several years, made probably his little small fortune. And then he just, when Governor Justice was elected as a Democrat, and Manchin, you got to remember, Manchin's wife was also on the school board at this time. So you had this Manchin-Payne, Manchin's wife connection. So as soon as he gets elected as a Democrat, he stacks the Board of Education with all these pro-Common Core people, because there was a whole bunch of vacancies. And who do they bring in right away? Stephen Payne, one of the architects of Common Core in West Virginia. And it's really been just a dog and pony show over here. There's a book out there that was written by the highest level defector on the Soviet bloc from Romania, what was his name? But anyway, it's called Disinformation. If you read that book, what you see and what I see, both at the state level and to some degree the local level, but definitely the state level and obviously the federal level, is a propaganda campaign, often by both sides of the aisle. It seems to have taken a new turn now, at least at the I don't know what you all feel about this whole impeachment thing, but it's I called it a shift show the other day.
That's good.
I mean, if you want to look at that tweet, that's even funnier, because I said it's a shift show and they're just throwing a bunch of shift on the wall, hoping some shift will stick, but the shift's getting really deep. Something to that effect. And then a couple of days later, after I saw the testimony of the ambassador, where he basically said, this is what the president told me, and pretty much everybody that had testified, even this guy, said, I presumed that it's this. But then when he was asked point blank about, did the president ever say, or what did the president say to you? Well, he said he wanted nothing. I want nothing. All I know is that if they're going to impeach this guy over this, you better go back and lock up Biden, lock up Obama, figure out what Obama got in return for that $150 billion he gave to Syria, and just keep going, because you might have to go back to some dead people too, and because there's been a lot of corruption. I jokingly saw a meme the other day about, it's all been, how much of this foreign aid ends up being given back in kickbacks to some politically connected politician. Nobody will ever know.
Well, I think it's Ron Paul who says that foreign aid is the best way to take money from poor people here in the States,
a rich country,
and give it to rich people in poor countries abroad. But Mike, the problem is that you're a logical person. Things are not applied logically just because the politicians don't seem to have the desire to apply it and say, oh well, you know what, we're doing this to Trump, so we should go back and make sure that all the other presidents are viewed through the same lens. So I had a question earlier that I forgot to ask, and you were talking about that when you're talking about cannabis and how to change that, and then there might be laws on the books you have to apply, and it's something that I've always struggled with is, as a legislator, which you were for 6 years, it seems like an easier cause for somebody who believes in liberty. All you have to do to be responsible to the people who elected you and to your own principles is go up there and fight for liberty to, in our case, reduce government involvement in people's lives. As the executive, you're in some way complicit in everything the government does. How do you manage that in your brain? Or do you think it would be appropriate to just, as the executive, say we're not going to apply these laws because they're specifically against liberty?
Or a constitution?
Well, the beauty about the executive power in West Virginia, there's a good thing and a bad thing. First of all, if you don't like the executive veto in a bill that is liberty-minded, say constitutional carry, for instance, you can override his veto in West Virginia with a simple majority. It doesn't take a supermajority. And we've done that multiple times. We did that with constitutional carry as an example. Now, on the executive side, the thing that's different in West Virginia, which is and doesn't exist at the federal level, is line item veto on the budget. So if you find something that is totally wrong, unconstitutional, and it's found in a line item on the general revenue budget in the state of West Virginia, or it's a waste of money, physically irresponsible, whatever it may be, you can line item that, veto that, and then it takes a supermajority to overrule you. So that's, and quite frankly, that's one of the reasons I'm running for governors, because in some respects, like I said, the governor is weak in West Virginia, but in other ways, he has a lot of power. He sets the revenue estimates. And so I kind of, and I've told Pat this, I got a little tired of beating my head up against the wall trying to get some things done, especially for fiscal responsibility in the state of West Virginia. And I know that I know the ins and outs, being in the legislature for 6 years, and I know who to talk. I know who would be a friend, because believe it or not, there are some government employees that think like us, and they're the people that come up to you quietly in the halls of the Capitol and say to you, "Thank God one of you are saying this. Thank God one of you're hitting the nail on the head." And whether it's trying to get rid of, in West Virginia, there's a certificate of need, which is outdated, even didn't do what it was supposed to do. Congress even repealed the mandate, which is unheard of for Congress to repeal the mandate to have a certificate of need in West Virginia for health care and make more of a free market type healthcare system. That's what I'm looking at, and I think we can get it done.
So go ahead.
Yeah, I just have one follow up there. So the certificate of need, for those who don't know, is you have to kind of ask the government to be able to do something in the healthcare industry. Like you have to ask the government to be able to start an MRI business or a hospital or something. What was the initial goal with that? Because I actually don't know what the initial goal or stated goal was, I guess.
Well, when the federal Congress passed the mandate to have a certificate of need law in every state to receive federal dollars for health care, it had three stated purposes and expectations, and that would be reduce the cost of health care, increase the quality of health care, and increase the access in rural areas. Those are the three stated goals. Less than 10 around in West Virginia, we passed our certificate of need law in 1977, and all states, in a very few period of years, all 50 states passed theirs. And I think it was 86 or 87, Congress realized that, oh my gosh, it's not doing what they said it would do. It's actually increasing our cost, decreasing our access in rural areas, and decreasing our quality. So they actually did something unheard of at the federal levels. They repealed a federal mandate in 86 or 87. And since that time, there have been, I think, 15 or 16 states that have totally repealed their certificate of need laws. In those states, I think it's the Mercator Center out of George Mason University studied it and said the average healthcare cost went down about 5% or so in those states. Now, there's a lot of variables to go into what's driving healthcare costs, but that's part of it. And West Virginia has one of the most expansive certificate of need laws in the country. One that doesn't, but still has certificate of need, is Oklahoma. All they have it applied to, I believe, is psychiatric hospitals and nursing homes. And I don't know if you've followed, but Dr. Keith Smith, Oklahoma Free Market Surgery Center, if you've ever heard of that, he actually, it's one of those things. It's funny because the president just signed some executive order that mandated transparency and procedures costs being published. Well, the Oklahoma Free Market Surgery Center has been doing that for over a decade, maybe decade and a half. And Dr. Keith Smith runs that, and you can literally go in there, and it shows a person's body, and like if you want your, shoulder done, or you want a pacemaker, you can literally hover over it and it'll tell you how much it costs. And
like going to McDonald's.
Well,
that sounds crazy.
And the irony is that his business picked up big time, and it's a for-profit place. His business picked up when the Affordable Care Act passed because it wasn't affordable. A lot of employers actually were starting to send people to him. And in the case of Canada, a lot of people in Canada that were on waiting lists and stuff were starting to just go down there and literally They could go down there, get a hotel, stay there for as long as they had to do the procedure, pay out of pocket, and come out money ahead. And everybody will say, well, that can't be good quality. Well, you look at one of the quality measurements is infection rates for a hospital, for a surgical center. And he's got an infection rate a fraction of the national average.
Wow.
So he's doing something right. And a lot of his procedures are done lower than Medicaid reimbursement rates and with better quality. So don't tell me the free enterprise system won't work in healthcare.
Amen.
We just haven't let it. We haven't had a free enterprise system in healthcare, a truly free enterprise system, for probably over half of a century.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think it goes back to the late 1940s somewhere, is where, government started sticking their hands in the healthcare industry, and at that point, you just invite lobbyists into.
I'm sure the original con, the CON, was because of a lobbyist, because
Sure.
anybody who understands economics would be, okay, so there's going to be less competition, less choice. What is that going to equal?
More profit.
That doesn't seem like it'd be a good thing for the consumer.
Hey, you mentioned line item veto. It's a great segue into one of the questions that I have. Top 3 budget items that you would absolutely line item veto or just cut. What are those and why?
Oh my gosh, I haven't looked at a budget for a while, but there's one thing I would take a major stab at is the Commerce Department. I think some of the cronyism that goes on in there is bad. DHHR is a big place. And in Department of Education, our State Department of Education, we fondly refer to it as Building 6, which is where it's housed. I would probably line item veto a lot of stuff in there, but then increase the money that goes to the local school systems as much as I could. But I could have told you a couple years when they did that budget a couple years ago, we had to reduce spending without if you didn't want additional spending, we had to reduce spending by about $100 million. And in that year, we found over $100 million. And at the time, the governor wanted to give a 2% pay raise, and we found a way to do that too. And most of it was getting rid of, as an example, in the classroom, there is no rational logic that every child should have a device in their hand when they're in kindergarten, first grade, second grade, third grade, et cetera. And that line item alone was somewhere between $10 and $20 million. So that was one I cut a couple years ago that I remember off the top of my head. But mostly it's bureaucratic type stuff. And the two biggest cost centers in West Virginia is the Department of Education and Department of Health and Human Resources, DHHR.
Okay.
So that'd be where I'd cut a lot. Plus, I got a couple. I'm a pilot. West Virginia has literally like 3 or 4 helicopters and 2 or 3 they don't have any jets, but we got 2 or 3 turboprops. I'd probably get rid of a couple of the aircraft too.
So it seems like just a natural thing to cut anyway. Like what did the state need to unless. I don't know. It maybe an executive that has to get to an emergency. I don't know how far would from one corner of the state to the other corner of the state is it about 4-hour drive because of the mountains and everything there.
More like 6 from one end to the other. But yes, you need an aircraft or 2, but you don't need as many as West Virginia has.
I'm not sure. I think that I'd prefer to have an executive who was so unimportant in what they did that they didn't need to be anywhere.
That's right.
But maybe I'm just
maybe obviously as a pilot.
And some of this isn't just for the executive, is what I'm getting at. They use that the helicopters in particular are used for literally natural disaster type stuff. They can take them out.
Okay.
And literally pull people out of the floodwaters and stuff like that.
Got a next question?
You're next.
Okay. So one of the big things I saw this past week was the Supreme Court coming out with their opinion that civil asset forfeiture was completely unconstitutional. I've been saying it for years. The only people that have been saying that or I should say the only people, but a lot of the people out there that have been, going after civil asset forfeiture and defending it are cops and politicians. For the rest of us out here, I think most of us know that civil asset forfeiture, I don't care if you're left or right or liberty or progressive, I think most everybody out there is in the same boat. How do you, this decision up there at the Supreme Court level, is that a good thing in your eyes, bad thing? What do you feel about civil asset forfeiture?
Pat and I put a bill in for the last 2 or 3 years trying to get it run, and what's funny is we had very different political spectrums. Americans for Prosperity was one that was for it, and so was the ACLU, which usually they're button heads.
Yeah.
But so Pat was the lead sponsor, I was the lead co-sponsor. We never. I mean, I don't know if I didn't keep an eye on it this past session because I wasn't down there. But the year before, we thought we were going to get it running, and it didn't run for some reason, and probably because, like you said, the cops and the local people that want that money. Without actually convicting somebody of a crime,
right?
Because that's what they do. They pull these people over. Hey, these
got a lot of cash or whatever.
Got a lot of cash or whatever. And there was one example over here in Jefferson County, the county next to me, where a couple from like New Jersey or whatever was down at the casino, which there's a casino and racetrack over there, and the one was like a nurse. I think it was a lady or the guy, and they got pulled over and they had a couple $1,000s or whatever, and they seized it, and they were like, you know what, that WTF, and to the credit of the prosecuting attorney, he immediately gave the money back and dropped the charges. He's actually a friend of mine, but the average person, they have, okay, I'm going to hire an attorney for $150, $250, $350 an hour to try to get back the $2,000 they just took from me.
Yeah.
And now in my case, I have a personal experience with this from a cousin of mine. And this is at the federal level. They live over in Maryland, in a place called Middletown, Maryland, over closer to Frederick, Maryland. And they had a dairy farm, and they started processing their own milk, making yogurt, cheese, butter, ice cream, you name it. And they did a lot of business with farmers markets and stuff in the D.C. metro area. So literally he would be making huge cash deposits. And his banker told him, says, no, you need to structure these cash deposits to where they're less than $10,000. Mm-hmm. So it doesn't raise any red flags. And well, that's a whole nother. So he did that. Well, then the IRS came looking for him one day and asked him what he was doing. He says, well, my banker told me to do it this way. They seized, so I think it was somewhere between $80,000 and $100,000 from this poor farmer. And luckily, some of the national farm groups got involved, provided an attorney, fought it for several years, and it made Fox News, made all the major news organizations followed it. And it just proves how ridiculous civil asset forfeiture is. I mean, if you can convict somebody of a crime and they use that asset in the commission of that crime, by all means, take it, but convict them of a crime. That's all most of these bills that would do, and like the one we had, you had to actually convict them of a crime. Not charge them, convict them.
Yeah, makes sense.
Yeah, the problem is, again, they're not listening to logic, and to, not to their credit, but to defend them a little bit, I think they're just blinded by the fact that they're so used to the money.
Yeah. Yeah, and the thing is, they depend on it. I mean, that if it's not part of their budget, their department's going to degrade in terms.
I mean, there's counties in Georgia where it is above 60, 70, 80% of all they do. The police department is funded by civil asset forfeiture.
Robbery.
And that. It should never be that way.
Yeah. It wasn't meant to be. That's for sure.
Well, we know that. And and these people take an oath. And some of them, their oath gets clouded when they see dollar signs.
Yeah. Banks, you got one last question for me because it's we got about 8 minutes left.
A short comment on this, I guess, but what the hell is happening in West Virginia with their Supreme Court, or your guys' Supreme Court?
Well, we impeached them all last year. I was a big part of that.
Yeah, I don't know about the story. I just read the headline every so often. It pops up, and I'm like, what?
How does that happen? That 8 minutes. Basically, they violated. I think only one person, or two people stayed on the court. One was tried and not removed. The other one actually challenged her impeachment to the U.S. Supreme Court, who basically decided not to hear it, which was ridiculous because, as you well know, impeachment is solely a legislative function. If you actually go back and look at the one U.S. Supreme Court decision from I can't remember the name of it now, but basically it's when a judge tried to get unimpeached. Back going to the high court, they said no, it's the sole purview of the legislature for impeachment. But anyway, long story short, we had corruption. We had there was a provision in state law that you couldn't pay retired judges that came back to fill in more than sitting judges, and they were doing an end around state law to do that. I believe some of these, and we had one pled to a wire fraud charge. He didn't get put in jail. The other one was found guilty of federal crimes and is in federal prison. But I believe that we didn't go far enough because there are a lot of these, anybody that had been a chief justice and did that end around for the overpayment of judges probably did it electronically, which you know what that means. If you did it electronically, that's probably federal wire fraud, and then they should have been charged. But I think our federal prosecutor didn't have the kahunas to go that far, and because it really would have, you literally probably would have had to go back to even some judges that were no longer on the court. And but when they removed it, we've cleaned up a lot of the Supreme Court. I still think there's a lot of stuff that does need to be cleaned up in the court system. We could get into CPS and stuff like that. There's a lot of, and that's something if you haven't heard of it, but there are federal dollar incentives for these CPS workers through federal law to take kids from their families. And that's a big problem.
Oh yeah,
huge problem.
When you put financial incentives, just like the law enforcement, you know, the civil asset forfeiture, they're basically using civil asset forfeiture to take these kids because they want the money.
Yeah.
It's not in all cases, just like not in all cases.
But it is abused in that way. Yeah.
Yeah. So there's problems with some of these federal incentives and some of these incentives that are truly unconstitutional.
Well, we'll have to have you back on to talk about that. Money is the root of all evil. So if you put incentives for money, bad things are going to happen. But just on the Supreme Court thing, I actually brought it up because I think it's a good thing. And whether the details and it's are complicated, I think we should see more politicians and judges and so forth being impeached. And I'm glad you hit on the point that it's a legislative thing. It was specifically a legislative thing because it's supposed to be not too hard to get a bad politician out. That's supposed to be the whole point of the check on the court system.
The court system,
which is wholly imperfect, as Jefferson said.
It's not even high crimes and misdemeanors it's
bad behavior.
It's bad behavior, which is such a low bar in terms of a judge.
And our impeachment, what's in our Constitution actually is a lower bar than it can actually be incompetence.
Set the bar low. Set the bar real low.
Yeah.
I think that's great.
Before I get off there, I really got to try this. Hey, if some of your listeners would like at least one liberty-minded governor in the country, please go to my website or look me up on Facebook. It's folk4wv.com. Donate what you can because the corporations sure won't, and neither will. Seems like the establishment doesn't want to. I literally have a grassroots campaign going in here. I've got more total donations in numbers, but a fraction of the dollar figures because those guys are getting maximum donations. But look me up on Facebook. My name is Michael Folk, F-O-L-K, and friend me.
Yeah, absolutely. We would have given you the platform, of course.
That's what I was about to do. I just pulled it up in front of me so I could see where you can go donate. Mike has been waging this battle with our buddy Pat McGeehan, who's been on here, and I'll tell you, it's refreshing to hear guys who are willing to go out with a family and with a full-time career and punch these guys right in the face, man. So I'm one of those people that is more of a brass knuckler, and so I appreciate this approach. It's one of those things where politics, people can dance through the tulips all they want, but at the end of the day, if they're not out there fighting and actually making that fight for liberty, somebody's making that fight for socialism, communism, fascism, whatever it is, to take your money by force. This is a guy you guys need to go out there and support. Michael Folk, it has been an absolute pleasure getting to talk to you and to know you. It looks like you got something else. Go ahead and lay it on us.
I want to say one thing. We have a real opportunity here, the Liberty Movement does. And Pat knows this. He's trying to work some of the national players involved in the Liberty Movement. We have a real opportunity in the Liberty Movement here in West Virginia. But we have the one guy, Woody Thrasher, has already spent $1 million already on this campaign. And the election's not until May. I think I could get out spent 10-1 and still win this race because these guys are truly what I would call, Frederick Hayek dedicated his book, The Road to Serfdom, to the socialist of all parties. And these two guys are truly just a different flavor of socialism.
Yep.
They're corporate socialists.
Fascists.
Well, be part of history, guys, and go to Mike's website and donate to him if you can. I will include all the links in the show notes. Do we have time for 2 or 3 quick questions?
Yeah, sure.
I just have one. What is the picture behind you, Mike?
Well, it's just an old picture painting. The one I would have been behind, but the sun's coming up here, so it was make it real glaring. Would have been a picture of George, a really old print of George Washington with his mother. But and the other side's all George Washington stuff. This is just happened to be something I bought at an auction somewhere.
Cool.
It looked good.
Last question. We're not going to do a lightning round because you got to get out of here. Cats or dogs?
What's that?
Cats or dogs?
In what way?
You're the first person to answer. Usually we ask we have a lightning round and we actually ask the person as the last question, are you a cats or dogs person? And
well, we have one cat. Her name's Goldie. She's over 15 years old.
Wow.
She is an inside and outside cat, but she doesn't have a litter box. She literally comes and yells at me to go outside and go stands by the door. So they let her out. And then we have dogs. We have 3 beagles.
Okay, right on. Well, this has been Michael Folk. He's running for governor in the great state of West Virginia. Go out there and donate to him at folk4wv.com. Mike, we wish you all the luck in the world, man. If you need anything else during this time going into May and past, please feel free to reach out and give us a shout. We'll try to get your message out there.
Thank you. I got to go fly a plane now to Houston. So y'all have a great weekend.
God bless, brother. Take care.
Thanks, you too.
Bye-bye.
You want to stay on for a little bit?
Yeah, let's just wrap this sucker up with a nice little bow. I've got tons to talk about, man. I mean, all this stuff that's going on. Mike is, we tried to have Mike on the show before. We had ran into some difficulties with that, and that's it's mostly my fault. But it's one of those things where I am glad to bring him to this audience. If you've never heard of him before, go out there and support him, guys. I think he's right, man. I think. When you have liberty campaigns like this that are catching on, I think everybody's sick, man. I've seen more Democrats and Republicans lately, just very lately, saying the exact same thing. I'm tired of all this. All these guys, and they're talking about their own party. That's the interesting thing that I am seeing that's different now. I mean, one of my buddies from the Marine Corps, probably more on the progressive side. He's from here in Georgia, lives out in California now. Said something this morning, and I was like, "You guys can come over to the LP." And then I had another buddy who lives here in Georgia saying, "I'm so sick of these Republicans. Who's a Republican?" And he's like, "I don't care which side you're on. I don't care if you're an Obama guy. I don't care if you're a Trump guy. I don't care." What they're doing in D.C. is not handling business. What they're doing up there is, this distraction and divide and conquer and crap. And you're just like, cool. Like, you guys are finally starting to see it. So
anecdotally, I don't have like the full history to take in because, I'm only 32. Boy, that took me way too long. But anecdotally, I always meet people who are just fed up with the system, and to try to look at it objectively.
Yeah.
If you look at the percentage of people who vote, right, which is it's a plurality. It's a plurality because it's like during a presidential election, sometimes it goes around 50%.
Right.
But during most elections, if you take the whole average of all elections that happen in the country, it is much closer to 15%.
Right.
you could deduce from that most people are fed up, because if you're fed up, you probably don't vote. If you weren't fed up and you thought it was a good system, you would vote.
Very astute observation.
And from our involvement in politics and my involvement in politics, I think what happens is politics really cycles through, and people, because, again, I think the vast majority of people agree on the vast majority of things and have good intentions. Good intentions aren't always like lead to good outcomes. Mm-hmm. I think they cycle through and get this breeze of fresh air of hope, and then cycle back out because they're like, well, that was a waste of time.
Yeah.
For some people, I think it is a waste of time. Like if they're not into it and they think that their life effort should be spent on something else, then yeah, they should probably be out of politics. But
well, it's that old saying, right? It's like if you believe you can and you believe you can't, you're right. You know, that's the thing.
I've never heard that saying.
Really?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's absolutely. I mean, am I just going to personally take off from the ground and go flying? Probably not. But in the realm of possibilities, what man is capable of, if you think you can or can't, you are right. I mean, that is it's a saying that's always stuck with me. It's like, stop making damn excuses. Get out there and do what you want to do. If you truly want to find a way to do something, you'll find a path. You'll put in the effort. You'll continue to work your butt off until something sticks, right? Like that's the real idea behind the American spirit, quote unquote. That's the idea behind entrepreneurialism. And you think about, people who have changed the course of history. Mm-hmm. They're men or women, period. Their DNA is 99.99% just like yours in terms of being a humanoid, for God's sakes. You want to do something, you want to change the world, it's up to you. Nobody's going to help you do that unless you help yourself do that first. And I don't know, man, like I think we need more people like that. I think as people are growing more uncomfortable, I had a really that piece by Lou Rockwell this week, right? Where
which one?
It was the piece where it was Brace for Impact.
Oh yeah.
Incredible piece by Lou Rockwell, and I had not looked at it through that optic. If you guys haven't, maybe a short synopsis in terms of his critical opinion of the economy right now is: listen, we've got an economy that's crazy, right? It's probably overinflated, way overinflated. He makes the point that you got, the Federal Reserve that's pumped $200 billion into the economy. It's basically quantitative easing. We don't have to call it quantitative easing.
Just in the past, few weeks. This is not like in general. This is just a small time frame.
Yeah.
So don't, that's a lot of money for that small time frame.
Ton of money in that time frame. So you've got $200 billion that's been pumped in, and the what is it? The comfort index. I found this. I've heard I've heard economists talk about the comfort index before. Have you ever really kind of looked into the comfort index?
I haven't. I've heard the term.
So the comfort index is, all right, there is an index that I think very powerful people look at, right? Very powerful people, because what happens if people are not comfortable?
Well, they tend to push back to try to find comfort.
They do.
Yeah.
So right now that it's hovering somewhere right around 59%.
I mean, it's the whole idea behind the bread and circus is you make them comfortable through whatever means you can, and that is a good mean. It's just distraction, comfort. Like, how different are they? Yeah,
and so it's a great experiment in terms of, if you're a part of the aristocratic combination out there, and you see that this is actually a pretty reliable type of metric. Like, how comfortable do people feel? 59%, you got more than half of people that feel pretty comfortable out there. What they cite in this article is the comfort index dropping, and people feeling like they're one event away from absolute bankruptcy, catastrophe, financial catastrophe, right? Mm-hmm. That's a problem in a growing economy, because as an economy grows, so should the savings of people. And that savings translates into comfort. So,
yeah, agreed.
Right? I mean, and so as Lou is making this case, the light bulb that I've got is getting more and more current that's going on in my head. And I was like, oh my gosh, Lou his perspective on this, I think, is right on, because rising tide lifts all boats. The problem is the tide isn't lifting boats. And if that tide is super inflated, and you look at all the bubbles that are out there, housing isn't quite what it was in 2008 because there are some protections against that. But you look at like prime, subprime loans. You look at some of the auto industry loans that are out there right now.
Auto industry loans, the average back a few decades ago used to be that the average
default.
Time for a car loan was
sure. 4 years.
Was 4 years.
Yeah.
And now the average is like 7, and you have car loans that go over 10 years.
You know they do that in Singapore. And so I can come back to that in a while. It's like a 10-year lease, basically, and it has to be off the island of Singapore in 10 years. That's a different thing.
Yeah, it's kind of messed up there.
But it's so expensive. I mean, Honda Accord over there is going to cost you over $120,000. 10 years.
Well,
right?
There's no aftermarket industry, so of course it's going to
yeah. So as I'm saying, with everything that's going on in the economy, people should be feeling much more comfortable. And if you've got an economy that's growing 3 to 4% a year, that's not a terrible thing, And I'll tell you, I put this thing out there, and I had 2 diehard Republicans just sit there and go, BS.
Well, that's because Trump went on and said the economy is doing great. Well, he has been doing that for the past 3 years, and sensible people have wondered: is Trump unaware that he's gonna, if he's owning the current economy now, he's going to have to own what happens to it?
Yeah.
Or does he think that
from the very beginning,
that as soon as it goes bad, he can just change a tune and say, "Well, that's because XYZ. That's
the Federal
because
Reserve.
That's because Obama. That's because the Federal Reserve. That's because
he's going to do it.
That's because the impeachments. The Federal Reserve would be the smartest thing to do.
Yeah.
But he's overinflated. Haha. How well the economy is doing in the first place. So I think intelligent people would see would see behind the curtain on that one.
And so I get back to this insidiousness of a comfort spectrum for the people of America. I really do. Because if you're just watching that and you're doing this experiment basically to see, all right, how low can we get this and still keep control? Because if we can keep this low, right, if the lower we can keep
the comfort level low?
Yes, without rise of revolution and rebellion and things like that where people are too uncomfortable.
So because there's an advantage of having people be uncomfortable?
Yeah, because what are you doing? You're taking more money from them.
I would see
one of the aspects.
The main advantage of them being uncomfortable would be when somebody is uncomfortable, you have leverage over them by being able to, in air quotes, solve their problems for them because they're needy, right? If you're not fully able to support yourself, usually people can take advantage of that in the form of money and making you feel comfortable.
Yeah. So I see this thing and I'm like this whole article. It's on our Facebook page, guys. If you haven't read it, I recommend go out there and read this thing. But what it translates to is some serious economic problems in our very near future. That's why it's called Brace for Impact. If Lou is right, man. The uncomfortableness, the disenfranchisement, the struggle, what he said, this will be the greatest depression. This is what he is already coining this thing is the greatest depression America has ever seen. And if that's the case, what's going on in Hong Kong, in places like Chile, Iraq, Iran, all these places that we've referenced in some of the latest episodes, you're going to see it here in America is my prediction. And I say that because I believe Lou is absolutely 100% correct in his analysis of what's going on in the economy right now.
I would agree, except I would, and some of this is hope, because I think hope is an awesome thing. I would hope that because that would expose the truth, that we would have positive outcomes from that as well. All this is going to happen because of fundamentals. And I think it's great when higher level things that are easier to see point back to fundamentals that are a little bit esoteric is not the right word, more complicated. Mm-hmm. And it's based on principles. If you follow a principle of Keynesianism of you just spend more and that will get you out of your predicament, that's why people are feeling uncomfortable. Yeah. They're over leveraged. They've got it usually has to do with having
debt-based spending.
Yeah. Having too much debt. And when you're over leveraged, if you've had a debt before, it doesn't feel good. And you don't have to be a rocket scientist to understand the consequences of, I owe a ton and that doesn't feel good. Like that is just it's almost as natural as, there's a lion in front of me, I'm scared.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, no, yes. I mean,
I've had some debt before and it does not feel good.
Yeah, I know. Debt, it's crippling. And that's the thing is there are some people that don't, you're not taught it in public indoctrination courses because it doesn't fit into the, this Keynesian type of economy that economists want you to believe we should be running. And, it'll show itself very soon. It's going to fall on its face. That we all know that savings create wealth, which creates jobs, which creates markets and things like that. The Keynesians obviously just want you to spend from a place of debt. Go out, buy, stay in perpetual debt. And then now you're basically enslaved to financial organizations, which are all, run by private cabals anyway. So.
Which are made worse by the fact that there's very little competition. The sad part about that is, and of course this should be applied on an individual basis, but if you take it on a macro level, the sad part is if everybody spent half of what they spend on new phones and maybe cut down their expenses on like buying houses by 20%, just cut everything a little bit of things that are really luxuries, right?
Yeah.
If I didn't have a new phone and had my old phone, I'd be perfectly fine. That comfort level would shoot up right away if everybody just took a few things: housing, new phones, cars, and cut it by 25%. You'd have the same comfort because having a brand new phone doesn't give me that much more comfort.
Sure. I mean, I'll make the case sometimes that technology, especially, is one of those things that makes me a lot more uncomfortable, man. I
was talking more just in relation to debt, but yeah, it can also, it beeps too much, and I feel like it owns me.
too much of a distraction.
I turn it off during the show. Well, I don't turn it off, but I put the little, is it the sleep thing?
Yeah, the little do not disturb.
And now I've got 14 notifications on Facebook, 9 on Messenger, 3 on Instagram, 1 on WhatsApp, and that's just in the past hour.
Wow. Speaking of notifications, no, I'm just kidding.
That would have been a good segue.
Yeah,
continue.
No, I do want to talk to you about a subject that you have a lot of experience in, and maybe we'll go a little bit long in the show. But before we do that, I did want to hit on real quick. I mean, I think this is huge news out of the Supreme Court this week with the decision on civil asset forfeiture.
It is.
There's a New York Times piece, and the New York Times basically is crap fodder. It's a crap catcher for bird cages, right? Like that's usually what the New York Times is about good for.
Sure, but I think who was it who was saying that? I was listening to a podcast the other day, and they said that because of the size of the New York Times, it's still relevant. It is still a necessary thing to look at.
Yeah, I agree. So when people are reading this, they're seeing this, and I think this is a neat thing. So the New York Times says the Supreme Court ruled. God, the Supreme Court opined on Wednesday.
Half of people wouldn't understand the word opined.
An opinion. They spoke their opinion. Opined. They opined.
Not our people. I'm talking people in general.
Yeah, I know. For those new people that may not, is why I said that. Wednesday, that the Constitution places limits on the ability of states and localities to take and keep cash, cars, houses, and other private property used to commit crimes. Yeah. It's called due process.
Potentially used to commit crimes. Like that's poor writing in the first. Yeah. Good Lord.
It's just due process there in New York Times. It's not that the Constitution places limits. No, it's not limits. There is no segue for the federal government or your local government at all. State government, nobody to come in, take your stuff and make it stand trial by itself. It's a due process. It's your private property. They can't take it, in matters over $20, for God's sakes. I think that's the 7th Amendment. There has to be a court case for it.
It's like they're looking at it from the other side of things. It's not like, okay, the default is it's your stuff and we're making an exception. They're looking at it as it's the government and we're making the exception that you're allowed to keep some of your stuff.
That tyrant's view is not a good thing.
It is not.
It goes on. The practice known as civil asset forfeiture is a popular way to raise revenue and is easily abused, and it has been the subject of widespread criticism across the political spectrum. The court's decision will open the door to new legal arguments when the value of property seized was out of proportion to the crimes involved. In this case, the court sided with Tyson Timms, a small-time drug offender in Indiana who pleaded guilty to selling $225 of heroin to undercover police officers. He was sentenced to 1 year of house arrest and 5 years of probation and was ordered to pay $1,200 in fees and fines. So let's get this straight, right?
They're saying that $1,200 was disproportionate?
Well, here's what also happened. The state officials also seized Mr. Tim's $42,000 Land Rover, which
I've heard about this case.
He had bought with the proceeds of his father's life insurance policy, saying he had used it to commit crimes. So there's other articles that I've been reading that say, they've obviously left the door open, right? What you're getting into is another ambiguous definition of how to interpret the Constitution. There are no like but, ifs, ands, ors, these modifying conjunctions in the Bill of Rights that enumerate your rights to be secure in your person, property, and effects, to have due process, to have a jury of your peers, and to go to court for any matter over $20. There's no ifs, ands, or buts in any of these damn things. But what the court has opined here is saying that now the property seized is out of what? Proportion. Who gets to decide that?
Apparently, courts get to rule on what that is, Shane.
God darn, man. Guys, you were that damn close. You were that close.
Well, that's what usually happens in politics, and that's why it's so important to understand the power of moving the Overton window is what they call it, in the direction of liberty, because politics, whether they're extremely evil people or not, can only play in what is possible.
Yeah.
So if you pull the box, but unfortunately the box is not where we'd want it to be, and they usually settle on a middle ground of what's possible.
What else struck you about what I just read in there? And I asked this because I have a certain point to make as well.
You might have to read it again.
The practice known as civil asset forfeiture is a popular way to raise revenue and is easily abused, and it has been the subject of widespread criticism across the political spectrum, specifically that sentence.
Specifically, the part about it's been widespread condemnation from both parties?
Whatever sticks out to you.
I mean, I don't think it has been. I think it's been a small minority of people who have spoken out against it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I agree. I think
I was surprised by the fact that he or she who wrote this said it has been a popular way to raise revenue. That is a very truthful statement that I would not have expected in a New York Times very
that is
mainstream thing.
The key word that I wanted to discuss real quick.
Okay, cool.
Popular. Popular among who?
Well, the government's people who take money, so
mostly who?
Cops.
Yeah. You bastards out there, the boys in blue, the thin blue line, back the blue, not the Constitution. You bastards out there who have been defending this practice, you and the politicians, the dirty judges, and the establishment out there who have been defending this practice forever. Why is it popular?
Because it's easy.
Why is it easy?
Because we don't apply the Constitution.
Because it totally ignores the Constitution. It totally ignores this whole thing that you've sworn your entire living to. Your oath. Your word. So not only are most of you guys, including Ron Freeman, my local sheriff here in Forsyth County before the Tea Party, saying things like this. I haven't had a conversation with him on this particular thing, but I saw him say things like this. And I guarantee most of your local sheriffs have done the same damn thing. Oh, no, we only use a civil asset forfeiture if we're really sure that they are, no, man. No, not in any stretch.
I have rarely seen it where law enforcement has to justify it to that degree. Even usually what they say, and I think it's because there's some kind of fear. I would hope that it's a thin veil, and so they don't want to give like too much, like, because it's so thin.
Sure.
That they just say, well, they're criminals.
Yeah.
That's the only argument that I've almost ever heard.
They're bad people. They do drugs.
It's just bad people. We're just taking the money. Don't you want this SUV that says paid for by
drug dealers?
Yeah.
Your local pharmacist? Is that who you're extorting? No, you're extorting the guys that do this in the free market. So
I'm not sure how many they are, but I have met one sheriff in Georgia. His county has not applied civil after forfeiture since he's been sheriff, and who, without me prompting him, said, "Well, it's not constitutional to take stuff from people without trial."
Yeah, thank you. Not only that, but to not only take it, but the way civil asset forfeiture is done, where it's not you who has to be found guilty of a crime, right? That's one of the biggest pieces is you aren't actually convicted of a crime by a jury of your peers. The stuff that they take by force is sat there and made to look guilty, and you have to prove its innocence. But the problem is,
well, that's what it's a very. I'm sure these are lawyers that came up with, and lawyers are not intrinsically bad, but the way they're taught during law school is to argue from both sides.
Government
and then they have a bunch of rules, and laws get more and more complicated. And I'm sure that one of the ideas behind it, when they started doing this more and more, was, well, okay, this is a different system. We're just, and kind of an acceptable thing. Okay, this is the criminal stuff and so forth, and then slowly just eroding all the common law things that we have, like, well, you're allowed to see your accuser. Like, well, it's just stuff, so that doesn't apply, and it's slowly just taking out all the ranks.
Yeah. So
that one side is wholly disadvantaged.
Yeah, I absolutely.
And they do this in normal law too. Try to erode all the little protections that we used to have.
And who does it work against best?
Against people who have less
means and resources
to protect themselves. Yeah.
The poor.
Or who are less connected. No, so on the flip side, who did this advantage more? People who are connected, which is usually politicians and people who have the money to get the right lawyers who are in contact with the politicians.
Yeah, hey, this isn't your guy, man. Just give his stuff back, right? Like, if you can call up your local sheriff.
That's actually what we just spoke to about with Mike. We're talking about the Supreme Court in West Virginia. He's like, yeah, they just didn't apply it to everybody, and the implication is, yeah, they used to be Supreme Court judges, as if to us it doesn't mean anything. They're just human beings.
Sure.
But to the system, it's like, whoa, okay, these people are connected. It's gonna be too complicated. Let's not make it too complicated. But the person who knows nobody, who doesn't have resources, it's not complicated to throw them under the bus.
Oh, it's easy. It's real simple. They can't defend themselves. They don't have the means to defend themselves. And, you know, the local, guy who's working for peanuts at the state, who's your public defender, that guy's not going to help you out. He won't be the public defender very long if he helps you undermine the establishment. That's for damn sure. So, I mean, it's just...
That is a complicated one.
Well, I'm glad to see it. I wanted to get into, electronic communications as well with Mike, but we kind of had a short time with him. The one thing that I want to transition to in the end here that you have played in the realm of is property and selling property and buying property and things like that. I this week have put my house up for sale.
You know our studio is in your house, right?
Yeah, by owner, and
you're selling by owner?
I am.
Cool.
And I thought you might think that is cool. I wonder, though, in terms of the people who have real estate licenses, how cool they think that is.
Boy, I'm not going to make friends here.
I'm not either. And I want to be more informed on this because I feel like I am pissing realtors off left and right now.
So I'm not an expert, and I have been out of the real estate thing forever. But one of the reasons I thought it was cool is my parents bought and sold real estate my whole life.
Sure.
We moved a lot, and often you'd have a second house, and
so a fallback place, right?
We'd fix it up, or we'd live in the house we were fixing up.
Sure.
And my dad, don't think he ever used a real estate agent to sell a house. He's used one to buy a house because the person is listing with a real estate agent for the most part. And so growing up with that, my default was, well, it's possible. And most people don't think it's possible because it's outside of the system, right?
And how am I?
You're a skeptical person.
I'm skeptical, but I'm also a do-it-yourselfer.
Yeah.
Right? If there's something that somebody says can't be done, like I'm going to be like, I can do that.
So it has been made more complicated. Whose fault is that?
Probably the government's.
Yes. It's one of the reasons I never became a real estate agent. I worked in real estate for a private investor during the foreclosure era, which was, for people who had money, a very good era.
Hey, I'll tell you right now, I got this house on a short sale, and that's, I've poured 8 years of my life into continuous improvement of this house. I'm very proud. I'd say I am proud of this house.
You finally painted the walls gray, so
For the most
inside joke. So the paperwork that is necessary and the compliance that's necessary to for like HUD stuff, like to prove you're not a racist,
Sure.
Basically, is most, man, the real estate agents are really going to hate me, is most of what real estate agents do these days.
Sure.
Right? There's so many of them because it is relatively easy to become a real estate agent.
Yeah.
And most of what they're doing is complying with paperwork that is it's boring to deal with. It is horrible. That's why I'm not a real estate agent. I just don't like it.
I'm gonna go back to the days when I actually used to listen to Rush Limbaugh. God, with his nicotine stained fingers, where he would like pop the paper and like do this in the background so you could hear this memo that he has here in his hand. I wrote down like I'm one of those guys that will find a way one way or another. I mean, and here's the thing is, buyers agents want to come to a guy who's selling his own house and say, well, what are you going to give me? Right? No, hey man, I'm representing myself is my thought. Mm-hmm. I don't need you. Okay, I don't need you. I'm going to put my name out there. I've got Zillow. I've got Trulia. I've got, I can go to all these websites. It's the 21st century, for God's sakes. Why are we still selling and buying houses like we used to, or even worse than we used to? Most of the time it's government. But I have found, and I'll tell you right now, like for what I'm listing in this house at, I'm just going to tell you guys, I'm listing this house at 325, right? Like that is like, I've done the research, I've looked at the comps. You can tell, you can just go out and see everything that is there and available and what the market is. And you go, yeah, you know what? So at, let's just say 3%, you're looking at almost $10,000. Mm-hmm. And $10,000 to bring me a person to do a little bit of paperwork that I can go pay an attorney to do, at maybe $500 an hour. That guy, he does this every day. I can go to an attorney, get the paperwork done for maybe $500 to, let's just say $1,500 for a closing, right? Totally covered. My thought is I can sell this and save $10,000. And I think a lot of people get intimidated by that kind of thing because they're going, man, I don't know if I can do this. I don't know if, everything is going to be right at the end of the day, in terms of ordering your title, arranging escrow, appraisal, inspection, negotiating repairs, and then, getting your paperwork in order, like your title, your property taxes, loan documents, property survey, plans and permits, and homeowners insurance. Like those are the things that, it's not, this isn't rocket science, for God's sakes. And somebody who is knowledgeable about housing and houses and upgrades and trends and real estate in the area, you should be pretty adept at selling your own house. So my question to you is, these guys call me up, man. I can't tell you, since I've listed this thing, Banks, 2 days ago, I have over 1,000 views on Zillow. To give you an idea, like I've looked around the area at at similar types of comparisons, at the traffic they have on these websites and the saves that they have on websites. Not even close. People who have sat in the same place with a house priced at less are sitting, somewhere around 200 views or something like that with a couple saves. We've got nearly 70 saves already. And I can't help but sit there and think that we're getting blackballed because some real estate agent called me up the other day and was like, hey man, is you going to have a buyer's agent, fee? And I said, well, I'll consider, you bring me somebody that wants to pay full price for this house and I'll consider, a point, maybe a little more, but that's about it. And he's like, oh, I can't afford it. I'm not going to bring you anybody then. You're going to get blacklisted. I was like, you got to be kidding me. Like, what do you know? These guys out here, if you're not buying and selling within the agents, they're going to try to run all over you, or they're not going to bring clients to you at all.
So to their defense, they're working within a system, and I think what has happened, and I'm going to blame government for the most part, because we shouldn't expect people to not be people, right? So there is a system that exists.
Sure.
And if you want to make money, and I do think that there is a place for more, let's say, more creative real estate agents to compete with the current system.
Yeah.
Man, I'm glad I chose the word creative because I had a word that was not as kind. But a more creative real estate agent, I think, could compete.
Yeah.
And I think what the system has done is made them through the test they take, which is the stupidest test ever, has made them sell a product that is false, right? What they're selling is they're not explaining their services correctly. They're selling this old idea of a real estate agent and an open house, and they're going to take you from house to house, which I think if there wasn't a system pre-built by the government, people would see through that and be like, I can look at, like, I don't need somebody to show me houses.
Yeah.
Like, it's not only is it not necessary, it's freaking boring,
Well,
because all you need is your phone, and you take a picture of your driver's license, and you can get into most any house.
21st century, right?
But the problem is they have all these laws about what a real estate agent is allowed to do, who they're allowed to talk to, if both buyer and seller are represented by a real estate agent, and if they go out of those confines, they've made them into these low-level lawyers, basically. And if they go out of these confines, they'll lose their real estate license. And everything still has to be somewhat represented by that framework, because there has to be the lawyer has to be involved and so forth. I think they're misrepresenting what they're selling. I don't think there's any problem with buying a service, and some people would potentially have a higher cap on what their per hour is worth, would want to hire somebody to find them a house. And
I agree.
I've known many people who do that, and they're like, hey, here are my parameters, go find me a house.
Sure.
That's perfectly fine. But I think for the most part, most real estate transactions for like the median American, they're selling something that doesn't exist. There's no hard work involved, and what it has become is putting real estate agents' faces on billboards and trying to funnel just as many as possible.
Yeah.
To get what I think is a disproportionate amount of money for the work that's put in.
I agree with that assessment.
On one side, there is a little bit more work than one would see because of the paperwork. And so I could see the real estate agent being like, hey, you don't know like all the trouble it is doing that. But I think that most of that work that they think they're doing, because a lot of people would have to trick themselves to be able to feel good about themselves. Most of that work that is creating the funnel of, I trade clients and buyers with this like network of other real estate agents and so forth. And that is something that has just, that is unnecessary. Like why are we paying real estate agents to create a cartel of real estate? Like,
I'm glad you used the word, because that's what I said. These guys are a damn cartel out there. But
it is allowed and put in place because of what government has constructed.
I think there is an opportunity here for some, and I'm sure there are people out there, and as I am exploring the space myself, I am in no rush. That's the cool thing, is I can sit here and go, guys, I'm a proper prior planner. I got months. You're not going to sit here and force me into adopting your system and $10,000 at minimum for paperwork, because as a guy who photographed and put it all out there, did all the work, hey guys, I'd love to give you 3%, but you weren't here for any of the damn work. You didn't come in, you didn't photograph, you didn't post it, you didn't come up, you don't understand the property anywhere near as well as I understand this property.
And showing this to people just takes me putting it on a website. You like, come on, people.
Yeah, I don't need you. So great, I'm glad you got a client. You know, that's cool. Have them pay your 3% on your side. But the thing is if you were transacting with a listing agent, right? That listing agent is also going to get his 3%. I'm my own listing agent. So how are you going to come over here and tell me that you want the 3% of the listing agent from me and the 3% from the guy over here that you're representing? That's what I don't understand.
So I have had a few real estate agents. I look at houses every so often.
Sure.
I actually did about a month ago. There was a really good deal. It didn't go through. In the end, I was going to buy a property with a friend,
right,
as an investment. And the real estate agent asked me, because I just go there. There's no real estate agent there. I look like a 24-year-old, and she's kind of weirded out by that. And so she said, "Do you have a real estate agent?" I say, "No." And then I proceed to ask her a bunch of questions, and she says, are you a real estate agent? And I said, no, I'm not. And she said, oh, she seemed to kind of figure out that I knew more than
your average bear.
And she was like,
hey, boo boo.
So are you going to be wanting to save that 3%? And I was like, yes. And right away, it seemed less like appealing to her, the whole thing. But because I knew, she became honest all of a sudden. And she was like, okay, well, it's good to know. And so there are some real estate agents who realize, I think that it's weird, right?
Because
most people don't know the information.
Yeah.
They just assume that's how it works.
Yeah.
And it's the problem with one size fit all systems, which government has done by setting their standard of how things work. Like, these are the people who are allowed to work. They need to know this, and this is how buyers and sellers have to transact and do business.
I also think it's a symptom of scale. As people who are, I'd just say middle class people, right? I don't think, if you were classically indoctrinated by the government indoctrination system, you kind of look at this as a scale thing, right? The thing is $10,000 is a lot of money. I don't care who you are. $10,000 is a lot of money. It might not seem like a lot of money to Warren Buffett. $10,000 is a lot of money, right? Like, if you go out and if you use that, $10,000 is something that I don't think most Americans have on hand. And I say that in terms of scale because if you look at a house transaction, a couple $100,000, something like that, they go, oh, well, I'm going to net, X. Let's just say they've been in the house for a while. I'm going to net $100,000 on this. But now this guy's going to take $10,000. I think they look at it and they go, $10,000 out of $100,000. Not that bad, right? I don't. That to me doesn't equate.
They take it at face value and don't. If money is being spent somewhere or given out, and to some degree it's being given out. Okay, it's not actually you're not purchasing something.
Sure.
It's the service. So how much is the service worth?
Right.
Is the service worth $10,000?
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure that connecting somebody who came to you to buy a house and somebody who wants to sell a house, if they came to you, like if nothing else happened, I'm pretty sure the service was not worth that much. Now, I do think there is a value to being in touch with your community, knowing people, and maybe having, like, it doesn't, like, I just want competing cartels. I want competing networks and not one big cartel, and the government kind of impedes that from happening.
I agree.
Or makes it silly to waste your time doing that when you've already got a good funnel system working that you can exploit instead of actually offering your service. And I think some people would be like, oh, that real estate agent, he's really in touch with like the best schools around here. And that's really important to me, so I'm going to go to him. Like that would be, but all real estate agents, they don't seem very different one from another.
No.
Especially if there's no complications, like they could be a robot for all we.
Yeah, and that's the thing is I don't see any difference between, the Keller Williams cartel and the 21st Century cartel and the Remax cartel.
Well, I think they're a cartel altogether.
I agreed, and that's what I'm saying is like
individually they're not a cartel.
If they were actually a lot different in those different quote unquote companies and not all the same, I would be I don't know. I would be much less apt to have this conversation. But I think it's a really neat thing to be a part of now and to see that this other group out here that you sit there and you scratch your head and you go, how many different industries are like this?
So you've got industries even attached to the real estate industry that make the real estate industry worse, which is the inspections and
government
and the real estate lawyers. The real estate lawyers somehow have, in my opinion, kept their cost lower than I would think they could inflate them, and their services more reasonable. Yeah. But the inspection process also, you have to get a government license, the standards and so forth. That's your only choice. So of course, if there's only one choice and one certificate, one stamp of approval, and you can't choose between stamps of approval, because that's what we do with most industries. The stamp of approval of Apple, of Microsoft, and all that. We're like, well, those people do it better, and there's only one stamp. You're not going to get good competition, which is going to, and there's only one person allowed to perform the service. And so the quality of the service is going to go down, and the price of the service is going to go up. That's just basic economics.
Yeah, well, it's very interesting. I think it's going to change as technology gets better. I think this is going to be more of one of those things that people, that industry is phased out of very, very quickly.
So there is one part of the industry, and again, I don't deal with it on a daily basis anymore. I haven't for 10 years almost. But there's Redfin.com, which has tried to. And I thought it was really cool when it came out. I was like, oh, this is going to change the face of real estate. But they have tried to kind of acknowledge that the service that was needed before maybe wasn't there anymore. And they're like, hey, here's this cool website, which it's my favorite. It's not the most up-to-date. Sometimes it's the same as Zillow and so forth. Here's this cool website. You can do all your searching. And we have like partner real estate agents, and they'll take a lower commission. They take 1.5 instead of 3.
Hey. If you're out there, Redfin people, I'll entertain 1.5. You want to save me the time and effort of doing all the paperwork? That's worth my time. And I think that is the perfect example of the market working. Is get all the, I love efficiency, and I love being able to reach out and do things myself and empower myself, right? Mm-hmm. Nobody else helped me flip this house. And nobody else put in the work and the sweat and the cussing and everything else that goes into.
Hey, I advise you to paint it gray, so I put in some work.
What's really, really bad is the first time I painted the entire innards of this house. Meredith wanted me to paint it gray, and I'll tell you,
smart woman.
I told her when I was painting it gray after painting it the off. I don't know what you even call that color. It's still a neutral.
It's like beige-ish.
Yeah, it's very light. At any rate.
It's not horrible.
I was in the living room, doing some of the trim painting in here. I was like, Meredith, you might want to get a recorder or get your camera or something and video me saying this. But damn it, why didn't I listen to you? 8 years ago when we moved into this place, you wanted to paint this place gray, and I did. I didn't. Damn listen. So, honey, I love you, and it's great. As we are very in sync when it comes to like home decor and decoration and the way we want things to feel and look and all that kind of stuff. So I love you so much, and I'm still I've got more paint banks, but at the same time, that's I wanted to share that with you, and I wanted to get your opinion as somebody who's seen it and really just a sanity check. What am I missing out there in terms of understanding this? And I feel like you can kind of confirm that you're kind of right on the money here with.
There might be a rule to like make up. It might have already been made up, but if you're told things are complicated and they don't appear as complicated as you're told, maybe they're simpler.
Maybe.
It ain't that complicated, people.
So, real quick, a little administrative talk between the two of us while we do this.
This is totally unplanned.
Is this going to be Friday's episode? Is this going to be Monday's episode? Or will this be maybe next Monday's episode because of maybe the pending holiday?
So do you want to skip Thanksgiving? Is that what you're saying?
Maybe. Well,
we skipped Christmas Day and New Year's.
I would like to do a Thanksgiving episode.
But I think we can do a Thanksgiving episode. I think this is Monday's episode.
Okay.
And that way we can tell people, have a wonderful Thanksgiving.
Yeah, right.
And
or I hope you had a wonderful Thanksgiving.
No, this is Monday. This is before Thanksgiving.
Oh, I thought you meant the Monday after Thanksgiving.
No, I meant the...
Okay, so this is going to be Mondays.
If I don't want to be the dictator.
My question is, does this work better on next Monday, not this Monday? And if we do a Thanksgiving show for this Monday coming up, we can sit here and talk about all things we're thankful for before the holiday.
But then we're missing an episode.
We can do Fridays too with the Anti-Federalists.
Are we going to have time?
Maybe.
Because it's listed in your house.
I know. It is.
How about at this point we just tell people we haven't exactly decided. We're gonna go record another show.
If this comes out on the Monday after, we hope you had a wonderful Thanksgiving. If this happens on Monday before Thanksgiving,
we hope you have a wonderful Thanksgiving.
And we hope your meal and your family and your visitation time with friends and everything else is just that time of year where you do take that time and really think about what it means in this time of season, the reaping season, to be thankful. So
this is brought to you by our sponsor, Happiness. And being grateful for things brings you happiness.
That's right.
What we also hope is that you will, if you have enjoyed the show, you'll take time to leave us a review on whatever podcast app you listen to. Apple iTunes and Apple Podcasts is where we get most of our traffic, and so that bumps us up. I actually learned that on November 19th, we were charted in the United States on the top 200 podcasts.
What?
For politics. 172. I don't know why, but I got an email from a listener.
Look at my stupid face. That's great, man.
And so we got charted for the first time ever in the politics realm for North America. And in the politics realm for Denmark, we were 109.
I hear the sponsors banging on the door right now. That's great.
I think we don't have enough views or downloads for that, but because sometimes Dave Smith's podcast gets uncharted. It's usually charted.
Yeah.
So I'm like, that doesn't make sense, but very cool.
We're charting.
So help us chart more. We did get a bunch of reviews the other day, so maybe that's what bumped us up.
Maybe.
So bump us up more. You can ask, share it with a friend, and then say, hey, if you like it, make sure to review.
Love it.
Also, if you like us even more than that and want to support the cause, you can go to patreon.com/rebellionpod and give us some dineros. Even though their value is going down, we can still use it right now to spread the message of fiscal responsibility and real comfort.
I heard peso's making a comeback against the dollar anyway. Anyway, if you've got anything to bring to our attention, info@rebellionpod.com. We'll share it here, maybe on our Facebook page, talk about it a little bit. And this has been The Rebellion, your place for peace, liberty, free markets. Go out there, find us on YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, and everything else. Spread the message. As always,
we love you.
We need you.
Peace.
Don't hurt people and don't take their stuff.